everyone, it's Lena Waffles, and I am here to show you how I made my Latios costume. Shout out to the Quizombras for this beautiful new mic, as well as to Devin, who is one of my many breakfast warriors, aka my patrons over on my Patreon. They're the people that allow me to make some videos like this, be able to put out a new video every week, so thank you so much. There's more of them in the description below. You can find out all the information there. For Latios, I got the design commissioned from my friend Gladzy. This is the design, and if you like this work, she does have her own Patreon as well as takes commissions. All of her information will be down below. My friend Hannah and I decided to make this costume for Vancouver Expo, giving ourselves 2 weeks, which really only ended up being about 2.5 days off of work to build this costume. So not very many hours for a full armor build. I had to do the patterning, the sewing, and a lot of the teaching while we only had this limited amount of time. We ended up doing some of it in the hotel room the night before, and Hannah's actually didn't quite make it to completion for the event, and neither is mine. Mine wasn't how I want it to be. So this is going to be kind of a mess of a video. At a certain point, I'm going to come in, I'm going to talk about what I did, because I did end up rushing to the point that I could not film. So hopefully everything makes sense in the end. I appreciate your guys' patience with how these videos are turning out, but I'm still learning. So yeah, we'll just get right into it. We started off with the design and sketching out the patterns. I started with the headpiece because I felt like that was the most intricate part of the costume, fitting it to myself, figuring out lots of trial and error with that one. I cut the main part, which will be the main part of the craft foam, as well as the details, labeling everything, how many I needed as I went. I did that for all of the pieces, EVA pieces, Worbla pieces, everything, including writing down what exactly needed to be done with them. And then I cut out the pieces in the appropriate materials. For the hip plates, I used EVA foam in about 6mm, and for everything else, I used craft foam, including the detailing for the hips. The craft foam is the typical craft foam that you can find at Michael's or Walmart, and I cut out a lot of it. It took many sheets, and I did all of my detail work with that, as well as all of the detail work for EVA foam, and for Worbla, I use it as the inside base. So here I am adding all my details before I put the Worbla on. This was my attempt to preserve Worbla, which is the more expensive of the materials. And then I went in and worked on my hips, which were EVA, using cement, contact cement to glue them together, sanding them down, and then using more contact cement to glue on the details. And then I cut out Worbla pieces for the right size of my bases made of craft foam. For the bracers and the headpiece, I used a technique that I called the sandwich method, in which we sandwich 2 layers of Worbla on either side. This gives really good strength. It gives good side visually if you're going to see the back and the front of the costume or the costume piece, but it does use more Worbla, which is quite expensive. The other technique I used is the fold-over technique, which I'm using on other parts of the headdress, as well as the shins and the breastplate. This preserves Worbla and is the method that I use more often. Then I did the classic Worbla booby cups over a styrofoam ball with saran wrap around it. And then because I wanted a more round shape, normally I would trim, but I actually just fitted it to my own boob. You could use a mannequin for that part as well. Once I was done that, I used a double layer of little Worbla strips around a D-ring that I found on Amazon, and I attached those to all the places that I wanted to do lacing or attachments. On this project, I used Flex Bond as my Worbla and EVA foam primer, and that's the primer that prevents any paint from soaking into crevices or holes in the foam or EVA, smoothing out everything. Then I used a typical paint primer. You can use something with more fill, like an automotive paint primer, if you need a bit more coverage if you use regular Worbla versus the Worbla Black like I did. And then I went in and did a base coat of white, and then all of my detail work with my blues, and I even went in and detailed deeper with dark washes and dry brushing. I used elastic to attach the hips together into 3 pieces so there was a bit more mobility. For the sewing, I started with a basic leotard made out of blue spandex, in which I hemmed the legs up, and then I added bridle mesh to the neck that I cut, stitched it down onto the main part of the leotard. I used a pretty basic linen and added some puffy sleeves with a bit more of a blue trim on the ends. Then I made a very basic skirt. I cut a large rectangle, pleated it to fit my body, hemmed the edge, and then I made a very basic skirt. I did a big rectangle in which I hemmed 3 of the 4 edges, and then I pleated it both off body and then on body to make sure it fit, stitched that down onto the bodysuit directly. Then I made little tails out of the same fabric as the skirt by cutting little U's. I pleated it once and then stitched it onto a cowl that I made out of faux fur. I stitched by hand the cowl down just so that you can't quite see any line when it lays on your body. How I got this to attach to the bodysuit is little tiny parachute buckles. Wow. So there's one on each end of the cowl, and then on the part that it wants to connect to, which is just above the neckline on the bodysuit. For this project, I also ended up sewing shoe covers for my favorite pair of cosplay shoes. That was basically the point that we wore it for the event. I was painting in the hotel room the day before. We ended up doing everything with strings. I didn't even plan how I was going to do hip plates, so you'll see in the video that I have a string across my belly that I absolutely hated. I thought it took away from the costume completely. Everything else was done up with strings, and I have a whole vlog on that here if you're interested in seeing that. Otherwise, I can see you guys on my Patreon for more things like this, or my Facebook and Instagram and Twitch. I will see you soon with an update video on the changes that I make for the Calgary Expo, as well as hopefully a prop before then. Thank you guys so much for watching. Bye.
We are going to start doing a new thing with my videos, and we are going to show fan art every week. So the fan art of the week is by Eki Hung on Instagram. I think that's how you say your name. So thank you so much for your fan art of my Forsworn.